completely uncertain, I don't want to use the word more unprecedented. Let's use uncharted and, just all the information that's out there online and fraud,
You name it.
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah. Exactly. So, filing the will with the court and anybody who isn't.
Hi, and welcome back. This is our video series on estate planning, probates, all that kind of fun stuff. I'm Keith Alba with my home team and the owners and partners there, and we're back with Renette Greer here at Greer Law. Thanks for joining us again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
So we touched on it a little bit in our first video, and if you haven't watched that, make sure you go back and there's great information in there. But we touched on some privacy issues in terms of probate. That can be avoided through those living trusts that we talked about?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So, I think privacy is it's always been a concern, but I think it's more, it's growing in most people's minds, right? Where the world's, completely uncertain. I don't want to use the word unprecedented. Let's use uncharted. We're in uncharted waters, right? Between, just the economy and just all the information that's out there online and fraud and identity theft and just you
name it.
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah. Exactly. So I think privacy is of growing concern for people, right? And so I think we talked about in that first video about how wills, those are a matter of public record, right? It's because it's a legal process. You're filing the will with the court, and anybody who is interested can, go down, do a little digging, spend, $25 or whatever, and get a copy of that. Right. So, having your assets in a trust, if you set up that revocable trust and you pass away, then the trust doesn't become a matter of public record because it is a legal entity, right? So even though you've passed away, the owner of those assets is still considered alive for legal purposes. So your passing is simply telling the trust, the successor trustee, what to do. And that all happens outside of the legal system. Gotcha. So you just are able to kind of have a little bit more of a sense of security.
Okay, and so when we say that the will becomes public record, that is after probate gets
correct.
Over, right? Yeah.
Yes,
so
yes.
They come in, somebody comes in and does a will with you, they set it all up, sign it, do all that sort of stuff. It's private until passing, absolutely. And then probate is over.
Correct. Sorry, I should have.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. I wanted to make sure that we were clear.
Yes, absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah, the wills itself aren't public knowledge until the passing.
Yes, absolutely. You can have as many copies of those as you want. Each subsequent one supersedes the previous one, but you can put anything and everything you want in there until you pass away. That's right.
It makes it tough to send paperwork,
yeah, exactly. Very true.
But with the living trust, revocable or irrevocable, either way, right? The paperwork is done.
Correct.
You said it doesn't have to go through the probate or the legal system that's there, so there is no court filing, so nobody would be able to go and look at that.
Correct.
And see any information.
Yes.
Okay, so that's a huge benefit, potentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as you mentioned, privacy being a big concern, identity thefts, or people with ill intent to try and get as much information as they can.
Yeah.
So definitely an interesting piece. How does the living trust keep asset distribution private?
So because all of that is in the trust agreement, the trust exists outside of the court process, right? So it's its own entity, just like an LLC, some sort of business incorporation documents. Those are not necessarily public record. Those are just between the grantor, the settlor of the trust, the person setting it up, the trustee, and then the interested parties to the trust. So beneficiaries within the trust are able to see it, but for example, if you have a child that has become estranged and you have chosen to exclude them from your estate, so if you are doing this through a will, they can see that. They can see, mom or dad decided to exclude me, right? If it's all done in the trust agreement, that's private and that child cannot see it. Only the beneficiaries can.
So if they're not named as a part of that
Correct.
trust, then they have no right to get
Yeah, exactly.
to the copies of it. Gotcha. And then on the flip side, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but going through the court system, through probate, a personal representative has got to turn over everything.
Correct,
right?
yes.
This is where this asset went,
Yeah.
this is how we distributed this is how we settled these creditors.
Yep.
Everything
Yes.
then is part of that
Yep.
court record and the probate file.
Yeah, and even if someone's not named as a beneficiary in that will, so for example, that child that we've chosen to disinherit, they're still entitled to receive information about it under the will, because under Colorado state statutes, they're considered what's known as an interested party. So just by virtue of being a child, that qualifies for that interested party. So
Gotcha. So that talks into the blended families kind
Correct,
of piece,
absolutely.
right? There's all these,
yeah,
so
there's
New World
that's
stuff,
it,
not just privacy concerns.
Yes,
but
exactly.
whatever.
Well, and exactly. So that kind of would tie into, whether, it's a blended family or just that complicated family dynamic where, maybe it's, not two families coming together, it's just one child that's been, or a family member that's kind of been challenging to deal with all along. But yeah, the trust really would allow you to get very specific in terms of the distributions, and people who are not entitled to have that information because they're not a beneficiary, they don't get to see that. So, sometimes with blended families, then, maybe there's sub-trusts that we're dealing with. So, that mom's kids, have access to that information, and dad's kids have access to kind of that information. So,
Okay, interesting. And is it possible if a trust isn't set up properly for that privacy screen to go away?
absolutely. So when we're talking about a trust, we're talking about a fully funded trust. And that means that the assets have been transferred into the trust. So I sometimes get clients who come to me who've had an estate plan already done with using, whether it's a different attorney or just they've done it on their own, right? And they want to make changes to their trust, and so we sit down and start talking, and what's owned in this trust? Everything I own is. Okay, well, looks like your house is still in the trust, in your name. No, it says right here, it's in the trust. Well, those are just simply, that's paper. Those are documents, right? You need to then take those next steps to transfer the home into the trust. If through a quick claim deed or something like that, or transfer the assets either through beneficiary designation or whatever the case is. But unless they're actually in the trust, then
So just because I name them on the trust paperwork
Correct, yeah.
doesn't transfer ownership of that asset
absolutely
into the trust.
right. Yeah, you need to go take the extra
what you
steps.
think you're doing and setting up and not really fully funding it, as you call it.
Yeah.
And then if it's not fully funded, or that house or the retirement fund or something like that hasn't been put in properly, then you're back to
Right, so then
probate.
it's still just part of your estate, right?
Yeah.
So just like, hopefully you have what's known as a pour-over will that's used typically in combination with the trust, kind of as that catch-all safety net. Says, you don't have any beneficiaries listed in the will aside from your trust. And so it just says, if I pass and there are still things owned in my name, I instruct my personal representative to bypass it and send it to the trust. However, we don't.
Again, you need that paperwork.
Exactly,
You need that pour over will
Yes,
to
exactly.
designate it. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you're back into having to go
absolutely.
through the whole process
Yeah.
that you try to avoid by setting up a trust in the first place. Gotcha. All right. I think we covered everything on this topic.
Right.
Anything else you wanted to touch base on?
No, I think just the trust does, it helps kind of keep things, more private, but also helps you really define what your objectives are, and making sure that everything comes cohesively into that plan, and then avoids peering eyes looking over and finding out, like, oh, what am I going to get?
Right, yeah, that nosy neighbor that wants to know everything about your life. They won't have the ability to dig into that side of it.
Or, any, maybe you have minor kids or something and you don't necessarily need the, potentially people, kind of saying, oh, hey, look, this is, a meal ticket or something like that.
Right.
So, it just kind of...
Johnny Jr. over here just got a boatload of money. Let me see how much I can get out of him.
Exactly. So, it's just, keeps things nice and...
clean,
and,
tidy,
exactly.
and only those that need to know.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
That's a great feature.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I hope you learned something in this video too. Come back for our next one.
All right, thank you.